Do you dream of adding your very own book to the collection of books that have already been written? Do you wonder where to start or how to finish? Does the idea of writing a book seem too overwhelming? Do you just want to polish up those writing skills or stay motivated? Do you wonder what to write about? Everything you need to help you write, stay motivated, and self-publish your own book is right here on one channel. And why? Well, because it's time to get over the writer's hump and just do it. You can write anything. Yep, you can write a book. Hello and welcome to A Book. We have another wonderful episode for you today. I am with a friend of mine, wonderful author named Michael Evan, and I believe that you are really going to want to hear from him today. Michael is an author. He does some marketing work too. He's just an all-around cool guy, and I think you're going to appreciate getting to hear everything he has to say about the writing process, about his books, and what it's like to be an author. So, Michael, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate the kind words. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. Michael, you and I met each other, I believe when my last book came out, and you said, "Hey, I think you would be a really good member of this group that I have going on," and we just sort of connected that way. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the concept was cool, and obviously, you know, Elon Musk being uh, a polarizing figure in in various opinions and stuff like that, and the fact that there was obviously a science fiction element to it, and also
Yeah.
kind of a um, alternate reality sort of realism to it, and I just thought it was a really cool concept. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and it
So
definitely caught my eye.
for our viewers that might not know exactly what we're talking about here, my latest book was called My Fictitious Encounter with Elon Musk. So the book isn't necessarily just about Elon Musk. It's sort of an allegorical story of he helps her write this fantasy sci-fi book. So that's kind of what that's about. But that's how you and I met, and we
Yep.
connected, and I joined you with some great marketing stuff that you have going on, and you connected me to your fantasy sci-fi focus group, which is actually quite a Facebook group out there. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. And through that, I've had the opportunity to connect with other writers, which I think is so cool because, as you well know, writing can be a very isolating experience for people. So, what made you decide to start this group and sort of go that direction?
How much time do you have? Um, so I was about 6 years ago. I had been in a sort of marketing related business that had nothing at all to do with writing or authors. It was a excuse me, it was a corporate live event marketing business where we were putting on like big scale live music events and selling them to corporate sponsors like you know liquor companies and cell phone companies and whatnot. Um, and I had been doing it for a long time. And around that time, my kids were at an age where they were getting up at 4:30 in the morning, ready to party. And often I would be out working at clubs till close to 2:30 in the morning.
Oh boy.
And I realized that I just didn't have the emotional or physical bandwidth anymore to handle it. It was a great thing for years that started when I was in my 20s, but um, I needed something else. Now, I've always loved books. Um, I had been volunteer blogging, interviewing, reviewing for a couple of blogs based out of the UK that I called the snobby blogs because they kind of were. They kind of focused on some of the artsy. And I still love a lot of this stuff, but some of the more artsy fantasy and sci-fi coming out of companies like Orbit and Tor, mostly Orbit, Orbit Fantasy. Um, Tor maybe being a little bit more mainstream. Um, and I got to know a lot of authors because they would reach out to me wanting me to review their books. At this
Fun.
point, this was fully volunteer. Um, I was also working for a very, not work, volunteer blogging for a very big American fantasy community, which I will not mention the name of, but it was huge. It was probably one of the biggest. And I had some people that I was volunteer blogging for telling me that they had more success with what I was doing for them for nothing than what their publishers were doing, some of them on big fives for 2 years, and that I should really make a thing of this, like a bigger thing. Consequently, I was looking for another thing because the thing I was doing was ransacking my ability to function. Um, so I ended up taking on a couple of clients who were friends of mine anyway at the time. And one thing escalated into another. Said American blog that I was volunteer working for found out that I had taken on some clients and let me go.
Oh, well.
And and also tried to steal all of my content.
Oh
And I
boy.
was their biggest content supplier for like 2.5 years.
Oh my
If it
goodness.
hadn't been for a good friend of mine who also happened
Mhm.
to be involved with them and managed to get into their system to get my content back, I would have lost all of it.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so that being said, some of my author friends who were very supportive said, you should really start your own thing and your own
Yeah,
community, your own, website community, keep going. And
right.
that's how Fantasy Sci-Fi Focus started. And this was about 6 years ago. Um, Started at a time when it was much easier to grow Facebook communities. So I grew
Right.
it. I grew the first couple of thousand were really quick.
Mm.
Took a while to get it to 5,000, and now all of a sudden, I don't know what's going on, but we're growing by about 150 people every 2 days.
Yeah.
So I suspect that by the summer we'll probably hit 10,000, and it'll
Yeah,
just keep going.
probably. I know from personal experience of running a large Facebook group that it just sort of does that. And I think it's just an exponential thing, but that's really cool. So now you have this community started, but when did you first start writing? What was the first thing that you ever wrote?
I mean, if I want to date myself all the way back to and I'll make it clear, my first love when it comes to literature is classic literature. I
Mm.
would say classic literature, stream of consciousness literature, which I'll go into some examples of authors I love, I guess, later on. Um, Fantasy and sci-fi probably second. I apologize for all the people that are listening to me that are going to listen to me say that have been part of my community, but it's true. Um, I do love fantasy and sci-fi and even a little bit of horror and stuff like that. But very first story I ever wrote, and I was in school. I excelled in languages, um, all languages, specifically English and creative writing and phonics and spelling and stuff like that. Um, I talk about this in the memoir I'm writing. They would usually have to make a special group for me and one other girl in my class. That was the advanced level group where they'd have to bring in like special
Right.
books when it came to languages. But
Oh
then
my.
in math, it was the other way around. It would be me and one other guy that were basically the just, you know, you guys aren't going to be doctors group. Um, so,
We share that in common because I
right,
did great when it came to English, but boy, when it came to math, I was in every remedial math class you could
yeah.
possibly
Oh,
imagine. So
it was
yeah.
high school math. I dropped it at grade 12. High school math
Uh,
was an actual like a torment for me. Like
oh,
I
horrible.
still have nightmares sometimes about not being ready for math test. And then I'm
That's
thinking to
funny.
myself, wait a minute, I'm 46. I have 2 kids that are like, you know, older already. What am I doing in math class? Like this
Yeah.
doesn't even make sense. But anyway, the first story I ever wrote was a fantasy story. It was in grade 9. It's probably 8 to 10 pages, maybe 8 pages. And it was called Dirk's Chronicle. And it was basically about uh, a knight dragon slayer that has to fight a dragon and save the girl, and he does it in 8 pages. and I got an A+ on the story. I mean, I did
Nice,
really well
nice.
on it. I remember it being a good story. I don't have it anymore, but it stands out. Um, there was a video game called Dragon's Lair that was one of those popular video games at all the birthday parties. It was a cartoon game. So it actually was really ahead of its time because it was animated and you could like press a button and make the guy do things. And if you pressed it at the right time, it was almost like a choose your own adventure.
Oh,
And I think I got the concept and even the name from that video game. But
okay, okay.
that was the first story I wrote, and probably the last story I wrote until my um, senior year. We don't call it senior year in Canada, but
Oh,
it was called it was like grade 13, I guess. Um, I wrote more of I wrote a story about just about my life, things that were going on in my life. A girl that I found out was very sick with cystic fibrosis, who was a friend of a girlfriend at the time, and and I wrote a story about things that were going on in my life and meeting this girl and things that alluded to that. And again, got an A+ on the story. And that was probably the last story I wrote until I started writing again more recently because music sort of became my life. And I got into songwriting and I got into bands and I had some early kind of success in music when I was in like late high school and early college age. And
oh,
uh, that kind of that kind of consumed my life up until much, much later.
we're going to show one of your book covers. This is a book that I believe you are currently working on, but let me get over there. I want you to talk about this for just a minute. The Life of John, right?
Yeah.
So this is you told me earlier that this was a project that you were most excited about. Why is that? Is this does this book have anything to do with maybe your journey through life?
So ironically, one of my co-written books called A Portrait of Dirk, which actually is a story that's a combination of personal memoir and fiction, where I actually used my first story, the one that I told you
Okay.
about Dirk, as a metaphor for basically the journey of life. And it starts, and so there's different sections. There's like a very weird kind of Joycean stream of consciousness personal memoir section intermingled with a much more standard narrative of fiction where Dirk actually becomes a character in our storyverse going
Wow.
forward that my co-writer writes. And I
Oh,
thought
okay.
about it, and I've been really swimming in this stream of consciousness world of strange, trippy, abstract stuff. Um, I realized that nobody's going to get the stuff in Portrait of Dirk, and they don't have to. That's fine. Um, I mean, the personal stuff, they're going to get the fictional stuff because it's linear. Um,
Okay.
and I had recently read a little bit of John Irving's newest novel. I'm a big fan of John Irving as well. And I read his newest novel called The Last Chairlift. And all of his stuff, he's written memoirs, but all of his fiction is also, semi-autobiographical and deals with themes from his own life. And I like the simplicity and the humor of the way he told his story. And I wanted to do something similar and take the stuff that I wrote in A Portrait of Dirk, but also everything else and turn it into a 3-section giant semi-fictional, almost real memoir.
Okay. So
I'm not presumptuous enough or arrogant enough to say that there's anyone that would really necessarily care about reading my memoir, but there are a lot of fascinating elements of my life, and I wanted to put it out there in a you know life is humorous and tragic, and
yeah,
everything in between. And
yeah, yeah.
I kind of wanted to put it all out there in 3 sections: my childhood, my adolescence and early 20s, and then marriage to where I am now.
That's
And of
pretty cool.
course, add some fictional elements to it, some embellished elements, change all the names. Um, Only reason I went with, as you can see, that the image is kind of like supposed to look a little bit like me. Um, and I chose John just because it was, John Irving that inspired me. So I'm like, let's just call him John.
Okay. All
Um,
right. Wow.
and
How long does it take you to write a book? Because you've written quite a few. So how long does a project like this usually take you to get through?
Okay, so this is actually going to be my. I mean, aside from the book I wrote with my son, which I did the majority of the physical writing. Um, Most of my books have been co-writes. Um,
Okay. Okay.
so I have JMD Reed. James Reed is my co-writer. Um, we have a process that allows us to be able to write books relatively quickly.
Okay.
Um,
What does that
he is
process
a
look like?
So what will happen is I will outline details in intense detail, chapter by chapter, all the basic story points, all the characterizations. So there'll be like a character model, I guess, what all the characters are supposed to look like, what their character traits are, and go through all the plot points exactly chapter by chapter. So sometimes I'd be sending him a really big document. He would usually do the first pass of actual physical writing from my detailed outlines.
Okay.
Then he would send it back to me and I would modify it and add my own parts, jokes and references and just things that, need to be taken out. So sometimes I'll keep a lot of what he writes relatively as is. Sometimes I'll remove a lot of what he writes and change it around.
So it sounds like it's
Um,
really just a good collaboration of you both bring your assets to the table and work
yeah.
collectively on that.
I do all the editing. So each book will go through multiple editing passes.
So do you
Um,
have a specific time of day that you sit down to write, or is it
you
just
know, no,
no?
whenever the spirit moves me and I have a chance. Like I suspect that A Life of John is going to be the type of thing where you know, I'm not as it is right now, I'm not writing it in a linear fashion. So I'll think of something I want to write and it actually says in the narrative that it's not a linear book. It's linear in the sense that it deals with three specific sections of my life, but in those sections it jumps around in
Wow.
a series of what I call like vignettes um, that I think are profound moments. So
Okay.
or funny moments or interesting moments
So
or sad moments.
it sounds like it's a very unique way of putting something together for the reader. I'm thinking of, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about a book that my husband is actually working on right now, where they're different scenes, okay, um, written in different ways. So by the time you get to the end of the book, you can actually take these scenes and mix and match them, but you come up with one full story. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense, it's quite a challenge. I mean, is this? I would think this would be a challenge for you to write if you're not going in a straight line.
Well, it was more of a challenge and I was wrestling with how I was going to do it until I thought that the best and it kind of goes linear, but it'll go back. So like I'll talk about my grandparents and a specific situation about my grandparents, and then I might mention something that happened in my life before the last thing, but with a different focus on different people.
Okay.
So it all kind of like it works. It will work and it will fit. Um, the reason I'm doing it this way is because it's very much a process of like, oh, I remember this situation really well, and it hit me right now, so I'm gonna write it.
Gonna
And
write? Yeah.
it's not a stream of consciousness book. I'm specifically um, there might be a couple of moments where it goes into a little bit of like that kind of stream of consciousness writing, but it's much more of a classic. I describe it as more of a classic narrative or a classic style prose. Um, and I did it that way purposely because if people want to read my stream of consciousness stuff, they've got a lot of other options. Um,
So
Portrait,
I I'm gonna stop you right there. You had mentioned, let's see if we can find it. You had mentioned that you had co-written a book with your son, actually. And I want to see if we can find that. Was that Max and the Captain? Is that the one we're looking for?
No, it's
Which one was that?
James Cranston in Halloween Land. I think I sent you that one
Oh, you
too.
probably did. Yeah. Let me see if I can find it. There it is right there. Give me just a minute. I
Yeah.
want to share this one with our audience because I think so. James Cranston in the Halloween Land. There you go. And I remember you telling me privately about this book a little bit, and I was really kind of excited about that. How old is your son?
He's not.
He's 9. So
Yep.
this was sort of his brainchild, and he gave you the story idea, and you got it out
We,
on
you know,
book form for him.
we sat in multiple writing sessions together where he would
Wow.
basically tell me everything that he wanted to happen, um, in detail. Like, because he had actually written a bunch of short stories before that I had kind of helped him edit. And he became kind of known at school and in his class as being a writer.
Oh,
Um, and he's a hilarious kid and he writes really funny stuff.
that's
Um,
great.
this was kind of like he also gave me a bunch of ideas. So Max and the Captain, which is the next series that's coming out in my big core Storyverse series that I'm writing with James Reed, was inspired by a bedtime story that I told both my kids for about 3 months. Um, the first book is anyway. The After the first book, it starts to build to a world of its own. Um, and I have another book in one of our other upcoming series called Here Comes Steve, and he started giving me ideas for that book. That
So
whole book was kind of
he's only 9 years old.
he's 9 years
Um,
old and he was giving me ideas for Here Comes Steve, I think when he was like 6 or 7, almost 7.
so
So kind of like, why don't
obviously
you what
he's learning from you. You've been an example in his life of what it is to be a writer. You're
right,
yeah.
I
So
guess.
he's going to follow in your footsteps then, right?
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, it makes me happy to know that he's doing it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
pretty cool.
so the difference is like with Here Comes Steve, he would say to me, have a place where everybody's name is Steve. It's a really funny book, by the way. It's my our it's James's and James Reed's and my funniest book. Um, but it totally comes from my son James saying, write a book where everybody's name is Steve, and you can have like a Minecraft Steve and Scuba Steve and Armadillo Steve, and at the end they fight a French fry monster with chicken nugget legs and hot dog arms.
Oh my
So
goodness.
every single thing, and this was, remember, he wasn't even 7, I don't think, yet at this time. Um, so every single thing he asked me to do is in the book.
That's great. That's
Now,
great.
this book, James Cranston in Halloween Land, now he's a real writer now. Like he actually was. I felt like I was working with a real collaborator because he had very distinct ideas of the relationships that he wanted, and it is a middle grade book. I mean, it's written kind of for the type of crowd that would enjoy Percy Jackson and Wings of Fire and stuff like that. And it actually gets really intense. Like there's sad moments and there's real emotional stuff. Some of that I brought in. So I make this a little bit more emotional, but most of it was from him.
That's so
Um,
cool. That is
so yeah,
awesome.
it was a really cool experience. Now he's saying, when are you going to edit the book? Can it be edited tomorrow? Can we put it out in 2 days? I'm like, nobody, it doesn't
Yeah,
work
it
that
takes
way.
time. Yeah.
No, like it's an almost 50,000 word book, which is actually, believe it or not, the longest book I've ever written. Because
Wow.
all of James's and my books, we have 20. We're gonna have 22 of them by the end of the year. But the
So
longest one,
how long has it taken you to get as far as you are on the book?
with which book?
Um, the one that you were just talking about, I forgot the title.
Oh, the one with my son.
Hmm.
We it, Not that long. I think we were writing it over around 3-4 month period,
Okay. Okay.
which is much longer than it takes James Reed and I because he writes really quickly and I do
Okay.
not.
Yeah.
So, um,
So
and I
on
said to
that
him,
note, typically then when you and James Reed write together, it takes what, 2 months maybe How long?
We can write, well, they're novellas, right? So like I said, the
Oh,
shortest is
okay.
19,000 words
Okay.
and the longest is 42,000 words.
Okay.
So and I'd say the average length is around 30 to 32,000 words for each of them.
Okay.
So I would say we can usually get a book in first draft form in about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow. That's something, on this channel, we like to talk to new writers and people who are just learning about the writing process, who want to write, or, maybe they've written for a while, but they're trying to get some fresh ideas. And so one of the things that I want to caution our audience about is not everybody's going to be able to get a book out as fast as you have. Some people it takes years, and some people it can do it. I'm a fast writer, and so when I sit down to do it, sometimes I can pump things out in 6 weeks by myself. Sometimes it's 6 months. It really just kind of depends. So I don't want anybody to leave here thinking I'm going to get a book out every 3 weeks, because typically that's not the case. Is that right?
Let me add to this. James Reed has written on top, aside from the novella series that we've written together, has written around 40 books on his own. His longest being, I think, close to 300,000 words. His first series is over 1 million words.
Wow.
He had 1 year where he was kind of challenged. Like he wanted to put a 12 book series of books around the 95,000 word mark
Oh
out
my
in one
goodness.
year. And he did it. And he says he feels bad because people come to him all the time and say, because, artists have a saboteur in their mind, a creative that is just tormenting sometimes. And they'll say to him, I don't feel like I'm succeeding because I can't do what you do. And he says,
Yes.
listen, nobody can do what I do. And it's true, very few people, I know 3, and I know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of authors that can do what he does. Believe me, if he couldn't do what he does, he wouldn't have agreed to work with me
Yeah.
as well. The only
So,
reason,
so I've,
the only
I've,
reason he's, yeah.
I was going to say, I've had the opportunity to interview some authors that have written 30, 40 books, and they have dialed in on a process. I spoke with somebody just the other day who was saying that he dictates his books, sends it off to a transcriptionist, and it comes back, and each one of his books takes roughly a month to write. So that process can be fast for some people, but you mentioned something. Some people have this sabotage going on in their brain that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not like so and so, I can't do it. And I'm the first one to say to anybody, yes, you can. You're never going to be as good as so and so. In fact, so and so is never going to be as good as the other guy. There's always going to be somebody better, right? You just do your best. Every writer just does their best that they can. And I think that's an important message to send out to people.
So let me tell you a little story that goes right along with what you're talking about. After Cider and Ale came out, which is the first series that's actually currently out right now on Amazon, the Max and the Captain series was really important to me. I had mentioned that the concept for Max and the Captain came out of a bedtime story that I told my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try. I didn't know at that point the Storyverse, which is our world that has now encompassed, by the end of the year it'll be 22 books, was not a thing yet. I didn't know it was going to go that way. There's been a lot of kind of creative evolution as we've written. But I knew I really wanted to write my After Cider and Ale, which is a bunch of books about various loosely tied together modern fables about animals that like to drink various types of alcohol and end up on different quests because of it. Started off as a very adult series that is now PG-13, which I'll go into later. But to stick to this story, I didn't want James Reed to write Max and the Captain book 1 with me. I wanted to write it on my own because it was a bedtime story that I told my kids. And I thought that, I wanted to challenge myself, and I knew there wasn't going to be any fighting in it, which is something I have trouble with, choreographing battles, which is the reason I called James to help me in the first place. And I figured I could handle it. Started writing, felt really good about it. I'm sitting here for the first time actually writing at a computer, which I don't normally do. I'm like, wow, I've gotten tons of writing done today. Like I was feeling like amazing about it. I looked at my word count, 1,400 words. So 1,400 words for me, if I can write 1,400 words in a day, that feels like a significant writing day for me. I'm
Right.
not a fast, I'm not a fast writer. Whereas for somebody like James, like 1,400 words would be like, writing his name. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like everybody's got their own, it's like I know it sounds cliche, but like you do you.
You
If you
do
can get,
you. Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
if you can get words on a page, if you can use the creative spark and actually get it out there and it works for you, you're doing something that's meaningful.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's so important. And nobody should ever um compare themselves. Like I ended up getting to 17, 18,000 words of Max and the Captain book one. And there was a scene that I wanted to write that was a dream sequence, and it was a chaotic, nutty, abstract dream sequence that I knew James would write better than me.
And
So
faster.
and faster.
Yeah.
So I called him up and I said, dude, I need you. I tried to do it and I, gave it, the real good shot. So
I want,
because our series is really meta, oh,
I'm gonna pause you right there, and we're gonna
no
talk
worries.
about this Cider and Ale Chronicles for just a moment. This one's
Sure.
out on Amazon, right?
Yep.
So let's just kind of talk about this series for a little bit. Tell
Yep.
us about this series. Tell us a little bit of what it's about. And looks like you wrote this one with James Reed. So
Yeah.
again, you kind of walked us through
I
that
had an
process.
idea. I had an idea a number of years ago when I started working with authors. I'm like, it would be cool because I'm not really doing music right now. I'd love to do something creative, and there would be a credibility factor to being somebody that works with authors, but is also an author on. I'd like to write a book on my own, and I had this. I've always been a fan of like Terry Pratchett and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Robert Rankin and a bunch of kind of more satirical writers. My idea was seals and walruses fighting an underwater battle over a beer monopoly. So I had the visual of the cover, which was seals and walruses facing off with a giant beer bottle in the background. That was actually the original cover before we went with these more sort of ornamental designs.
Who designs
Um,
your covers? I'm going to ask you that real
so
quick. Who designs your
these
covers?
ones, Katrine Russell designs everything that I do now.
Okay.
She didn't design the Book of John, the Life of John cover, but she's done all the stuff I've done with James, and she
Okay.
also designed the James Cranston and Halloween Land book. She's
Okay.
fantastic. Strongly
Yeah.
recommended.
Yeah. Your covers are very well branded.
She's also an amazing author in her own right,
Good.
based out of Sweden. Um, so yeah, so I started writing, and I had written a few chapters of the seal and walruses fighting over beer book, and I got to a fight scene, didn't know what to do. I had read James Reed's books, and he does aerial battles and military choreographed scenes so well. I just said, hey, would you be able to ghostwrite me through a scene? And he said, sure. And then he ended up having a lot of fun writing it, and he told me that. Said first he looked at um, the outline and he said, "This is ridiculous. You really want me to write this?" Um, and then I said, "Yeah, just come on." And he ended up having fun with it. And I said, "Well, maybe it doesn't have to be a ghostwrite. Maybe it can just be a collaboration, and I'll put your name on the cover." He said, "Okay, I'm cool with that." Um, put it out. It was only 19,000 words. Came out to about like 90 pages,
Wow.
large print. Um, put it out for review and got amazing reviews. Like I'm talking like all 5-star from about 60, 70 people. And some of
Wow.
the reviews, you'd swear that they were reviewing like the new Radiohead album or like,
You're
something
kidding.
really, yeah, it was amazing. And I'm like, I called up James and I said, dude, like they like this. Like this is like I don't know, we haven't done anything with it. It's not like selling or anything. I didn't even kind of was more doing it just for like a bit of a personal, like a notch in my belt kind of thing, right? But people really liked it. And I said, why don't we do another one,
Oh
like a
boy.
sequel, and make it bigger? So he said, yeah, I'm down. So we did that. And the sequel, Alehouse Rebellion, which was pretty much the same as Alehouse Wars, but just bigger. Everything was kind of amped up to 11. Got made it onto some, like, I think 4 or 5 best indie books of the year lists that year. A whole bunch
Sheesh.
of blogs and even better
Wonderful.
reviews. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, wow. So, now, so my thing is I always want to kind of challenge myself to do something a little bit bigger and a little bit different than what people would expect. So third book was a new series. Didn't know it was going to be necessarily part of the Cider and Ale series, Chronicles. But it was around COVID time. And
Oh,
my wife and I were looking for, she really liked cider, a specific type of cider. And COVID was the time of everybody being home and eating too much and day drinking. Um, so I went around looking for cider, and all the stores were sold out because everybody had the
oh,
same idea. So I wrote a book about two sidewinder snakes that are married in the desert. It was loosely based on the Mojave Desert. Going around looking for a magical cider that would cure the desert of a plague that was killing all the predators and all the prey. And it was called the Cider of Legend.
huh.
And
And
that
so that
book,
was the third. That was the third one
that
in
was
the
the third.
series.
After the third, my next idea was, let's do a crossover, because I had just read a big
Okay.
crossover story that one of my favorite indie writers, C.T. Phipps, had done. And I thought it was really cool. Like, let's do a big crossover and mesh the world of Cider of Legend with the world from Alehouse Wars and Alehouse Rebellion. And
Okay.
that ended up being the book that started the Storyverse,
Huh.
because James and I brought ourselves in as characters, as the creators of the world, where it started to become apparent that these were actually characters in a story, and we were the writers who basically shaped the world. And that ended up being our biggest story, um, and my favorite probably in the series.
Oh,
Fifth
fun.
book is a diversion, but the character does come. I had a friend that passed away that was in a famous band, and I wanted to do a tribute to him. So
Oh,
it's about a platypus named Paul that uh, is in a band and plays slide guitar, in a band with humans that just act like he's another human. They don't even make reference really to the fact that he's a platypus. And he goes on a wine tasting tour across Australia, and ends up having to fight a bunch of wine-addled zombies that become zombies by drinking cheap box wine.
oh. So yeah,
Um,
yeah, you have, I mean, you have this whole series going on here,
yeah,
and it's
it's
incredible. So
weird.
now that, see, that would have been number four, right?
That was 5,
And then
and then the sixth
the whiskey.
one,
Okay, I'm trying to read this on my screen here. The whiskey
Whiskey
eternal.
Eternal, is
Okay.
James's favorite of the series, because it deals with a, I don't want to say fan favorite because that sounds pretentious, but we did have a number of reviews on the
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because you guys do have a fan base. You really do. You have people who are following you. So it's not that pretentious to say this is
yeah,
a fan favorite. So
there's
that's
people that love
perfectly
the books.
okay.
We had a character in that was in Cider of Legend and Cider for Harborland named Sandy Sam, and he's a sidewinder that's basically a little bit of a jerk, but he kind of redeems himself. Um, and his obsession is the exceptions of the English language and why words are spelled different ways and mean different things. And he goes on rants about them, and it drives him crazy. And he's basically, I don't know if you've ever seen Kevin Smith's movies. Clerks was the big one that everybody knows. They were really big in the 90s. And there were these two characters called Jay and Silent Bob that were really, really kind of like the Kevin Smith's mascot, like flagship characters. And Jay
Okay.
was just this guy that swore a lot and got annoyed by everything and always kind of freaked out. And he was really, really funny. I modeled Sandy Sam after him, And James kind of created one of his biggest things to be these exceptions with the English language, obviously, because those are things that he thinks about.
Okay.
So because everybody liked, so you got to do another Sandy Sam book, we decided to make Sandy Sam the feature of the last book in the series. And it's basically Sandy Sam dies and comes back to life, and he realize in one of in the Cider of Legend, and he realizes that he has a second chance at life. He doesn't want to blow it. He wants to write like the great American novel, basically.
Mm.
But he wants to write the novel that's better than the novel that we're writing, and he calls it the
Oh.
Book of Sam. And in that book, he wants to set out with his buddy Scotty, who's a fringe-toed lizard, who he used to want to eat, but then they became best friends. Well, Scotty hates Sam. Scotty hates Sam, but he goes with him anyway. They're kind of like reluctant friends.
Oh
They
boy.
end up being best friends. And they go
Oh.
on this mission to find the whiskey eternal, which will help them live forever. And there's a real strong moral and metaphor in the book about living forever, the concept of eternal life, because, you know, well, I don't want to, I'm getting into spoiler
Yeah,
territory,
don't
but
spoil anything.
it's the
I want
most
people to read
intense.
it.
No, it's the most intense book in the series because it really does bring up a lot of concepts about what it means to live forever, and the I guess the invaluing of the life experience if you knew that you could live forever
Hmm.
and you
Okay.
didn't have and the meaningful moments that you have often come from the fact that our time is limited.
So I'm just going to remind everybody, this is the Cider and Ale Chronicles. And
Yep.
if they want to find that, they can head on over to Amazon, right? This is for sale on Amazon right now. And
Yep. Just came out.
yeah. How long has it been out? Let's see. Not
Been
long.
out for a few weeks. We
Yeah, no,
didn't
I was gonna say not very long. So that's
yeah,
pretty
no,
cool.
we didn't do a massive push on it because Max and the Captain is really, like I said, where the Storyverse series and the four series that follow it really begin. So
Okay.
there are cameos of Cider and Ale characters throughout the whole series. So reading Cider and Ale will probably make the entire Storyverse series a little bit more rewarding because
Okay.
of the Easter eggs, etc. But I feel like Max and the Captain is where it really starts. Like, so you can start with either, but you can kind of read Cider and Ale whenever you want.
Okay.
Whereas Max and the Captain really begins the Storyverse. So from Max and the Captain all the way to Wings Jones, which is the final series, we've decided to end it with the Wings Jones series. You really can't read the later series until you've started with Max and the Captain and gone all the way through it.
Okay. So talk about Max and the Captain for just a second.
Sure. Toronto dude, 24 years old. He's based on an older version, a grown-up version of my son. His name's Jamie Grayson, but everybody calls him the Captain. He finds a panda running around the streets of Toronto, screaming for bamboo, decides to bring him home, and his life just becomes a giant comedic mess. And the first book deals with, there's some, it starts off with him trying to find bamboo for his giant panda to eat because pandas need a lot of bamboo. And it ends on a Gamelit style mission that goes through urban fantasy, epic fantasy, and beyond. First book is definitely the most grounded, as it takes place mostly in Toronto, and that's where the Captain meets his girlfriend, who becomes his wife. And there's some dark stuff that happens with her backstory. It's probably the
Okay.
most mature, probably the most. I mean, a lot of the stuff I deal with in later books gets pretty mature and pretty intense, but it's probably more intense and mature than anything I had done up to that point.
Okay. All
So
right.
it's where things really take off. I love the characters. Um, the Captain is probably the heart and soul of the entire Storyverse.
Nice.
So
Nice.
he's the character that, like, if you don't see him for a couple of books and then he comes back, people are like, "Oh, it's nice to see him again." And Max
Okay.
too. Max is kind of like, I'd compare him to a cleaner Peter Griffin
Oh.
from Family Guy.
So he gets to show up from time to time just so that your audience, is like, oh, yay, we get to see him again.
Well, the captain shows up. This is in the Guardians of the Storyverse series, which is our the next series after Max and the Captain. Um, he's in he's in all the books, and one
Okay.
of them is one of them is specifically called Jamie the Captain. Um, Guardians of the Storyverse is a weird series, and I'm not going to get into it's I wrote it during a really difficult time in my life, so a lot of that stuff is reflected in the series, and there's even prefaces in the series that talk about
Talk
some of
about
the
it.
things that were going on. But each book has a name, so it's A Portrait of Dirk, which I mentioned a little bit about Dirk
Right, right,
being
right.
my friend.
Yeah,
Then
your
Here Comes
first.
Steve. Here Comes Steve is kind of like the reprieve book. It's really funny. It was the one that it ties into the series, but it's this guy named Steve that has an out of body experience when he chokes on a cherry Twizzler at work, and then ends up on Planet Steve, where the ocean
I
is pink.
I
The
shouldn't
ocean
be
is
laughing,
pink.
but it just sounds funny.
No, it's a fun. It is meant to. It's played off as funny. There's nothing serious in Here Comes Steve.
Let's talk about. I want to talk about this one for just a second here.
Sure.
See if I can get this screen shared. Wings Jones and the Prophecy of Sir Arthur. This is another one
Yep.
with you and James
Yeah. So
Reed.
that's
Tell me about that.
this book is actually finished.
Okay.
There are four more in the series. We're about to start writing the second one. This is the final series in the Storyverse
Okay.
series. Luckily,
Gotcha.
there's five series in it. Um, Cider and Ale, Max and the Captain, Guardians of the Storyverse, Joe the Prophet, and then Wings Jones.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Wings Jones is based is a he's a side character that shows up in a couple of the books before this. He is based on a rock star who died in 1979 named Lowell George, from a band called Little Feat, who are probably one of my, if not my favorite bands. Um, and he is something happens at the end of the Joe the Prophet series, which is the previous series before this one,
So
that wipes
I
out
have a
the.
question. I have a question for you.
Yeah,
If if we were talking about a television show, a series, or something like that, and one of the characters from that we find in another show, we would call that a spin-off. Is this sort of what you've done with some of these characters? You've made spin-off series? Is that what you would call them?
sort of, but it's a bigger narrative. It's
Okay.
like so. There's a reason why Wings Jones is the star of the Wings Jones series, and without giving too much away, um, the Storyverse, which is all our characters leading up to Wings Jones, gets completely wiped out of existence by Cthulhu. I'm
Okay.
talking H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu, the Eldritch God. So think of Thanos from the Marvel Cinematic Universe snapping his finger and everybody's gone or half the population's gone. Well, Cthulhu goes a step further because he's bored and decides to wipe out the entire Storyverse. How does he do
Oh,
that? Well, he makes it so the writers of the Storyverse, James and myself, can no longer remember anything we've written.
oh
All
my
gets
goodness.
wiped off of all gets wiped off of our hard drives, all gets wiped out of our minds.
Oh my
And
goodness.
he's created a world where only public domain characters can exist
That's
and Wings Jones.
crazy. Oh,
So
wow.
you've got NPCs. So you've got Wings Jones, who the only reason he survived is because he's not really a Storyverse character because he's based on somebody that is actually real. So he
Uh-oh.
survives
Oh boy.
in a world of where he shows up basically in Los Angeles, which is where he lived when he was alive.
Ah.
Um, and he's in a world with a bunch of NPCs who just are always talking about what a great day they're having. That's about it.
Oh
And
my gosh.
And then Winnie the Pooh and Sherlock Holmes show up at his house, at his apartment. And it goes a lot deeper than that. The whole series is basically inspired by a lot of my literary heroes. So you got Arthur Conan Doyle in the first one. You've got Herman Melville in the
Okay, so
second
this
one.
had to have been an awful lot of fun for you to write.
Well, it was a lot of fun. It gets really intense. So we go from Conan Doyle to Herman Melville with Captain Ahab in the second one. James Joyce in the third one, so the whole book is going to be written in Joycean style writing. Dante's Inferno in the fourth one, and then Robert Frost in the fifth one.
Crazy, crazy.
So
Wow.
it messes around with different literary styles. It gets all the meta-textual craziness out of my system. And I came up with a perfect ending. I wasn't planning on ending it with book 5 of the series. I thought we were going to do a thing where everything would work out, and then we would do 2 separate teams, one led by Wings Jones, one led by the captain, and they would do separate things, and they would come together for one big battle. Decided, no, I got the perfect ending. Got to end it with Wings Jones book 5, which is called Wings Jones on the Road Less Traveled.
Oh my goodness. So it's been putting this whole thing to rest. That's pretty cool. That's
yeah,
really
it's going to take a while.
I'm sure it will, but yeah.
We won't be finished probably for over a year. Like, I mean, the writing even, like, I think that we're going to start writing the second Wings Jones book, and by the time we're done, it'll be at least a year and a half. Probably.
So I want to go back to talking about your writing process itself. So when you and James are writing these books, do you have an editor who edits your books?
Me.
You do the editing, okay?
Yeah. I'm an editor. Like I edit. It's one of the things I do. So I do multiple passes. I mean,
and do you have beta readers when you put these books out? Do you get some beta readers?
Sometimes it's tough now with the series that's so intense and involved. Like I'll have beta readers. I'll have a big beta team for the James Cranston book, which has nothing to do with any of the Storyverse books. And obviously I'll have beta readers for The Life of John.
And then you guys self-publish, correct?
Yes.
You self-publish, all right. And you have somebody who makes the covers for you. So I'm talking about this because one of the things that I like to share with the audience is that I know that writing itself, the actual process of writing can be such a lonely experience. And sometimes you wonder, am I on the right track? Am I not? And I think it is important, especially for beginner writers, to surround themselves with community, with people who will get a second set of eyes on that, get a third set of eyes, get other people's input until, well, I say until your skills get better, but honestly, I think it's just good to have a second set of eyes all the time. That's me personally, no matter who you are. Even the best writers out there, the top writers out there, they have other people going through it before it actually goes to publishing. So I just think it's really cool that you're not doing this alone. You have other people around who are kind of taking a look at it. I know you put a lot, I want to share this real quick. You put a lot out on your fantasy sci-fi focus group. Let's talk about that for a minute. This is a Facebook
I'm hoping my
group.
phone doesn't. I'm looking at my battery and I have a lot. I have tons of charge.
Well, we'll get you. We'll get you off here in just a minute here.
And I just don't want to ruin this for you by having it just die on me in the middle of. But yeah, I'll do my best.
So anyway, I want to share this. Let me get the screen share going real quick here. This fantasy sci-fi focus group.
Yeah.
This isn't just authors. That you've got some readers on here too who are really interested in, they're trying to find books that are pleasurable to them to read. And so, but you post a lot on here talking about your series. I see Siobhan Bulmer. She's actually going to be a guest on our show here, I think in a couple of weeks. She's going to be on here.
She is absolutely fantastic.
Yes. And so you have excuse me, so these are a lot of writers that get on there. And you offer a service. That's kind of where you and I are at in our relationship with each other, is you offer a service where you help writers market their books and provide them with some resources and things like that. And
it's more consultation, publicity, and consultation, publicity, and I mean, when I think about marketing, I think more about like hard advertising.
Sure. But you're giving them advice on how to go about doing those things, and so it's pretty valuable.
Like things like getting them integrated into communities, author takeovers.
So listen, I want to talk real quick about the author takeovers, and that's that's an opportunity that somebody can have in the group, because like you said, you're going to be up to 10,000 people. I have a pretty good feeling about that, probably by the summer for sure.
Yep,
And
for
so
sure.
when you're talking about 10,000 people, not every person is going to be able to take over the group. That's just too many people. So in order to, and let the audience know what a group takeover is. That just means that somebody gets to, for a certain period of time, for a couple of hours, they get to keep posting in the group all about their book and themselves, and just sort of introduce the group to them and
Yeah,
their writings. And so
yeah.
in order to get to do
I
that,
have,
a
yeah.
person would get to sign on with you as a consultant, and that's one of the advantages to signing on as a um, one of your customers, if you will, one of your clients, is that they do get to do these group takeovers, correct?
Yeah, yeah, group takeovers and coordinated events that are geared
Yeah,
entirely
there's all sorts of events
towards
and
their
stuff
book.
that
There's
goes on
there's
in the group. But I also want to talk to anybody out there who's just looking for a good read. There are some wonderful books that get passed on and shared through
Oh
this
yeah,
group. So go check
definitely.
it out. It's a fantasy sci-fi focus group, and really, really, really good, strong group. And it's a great place for community for those who are writing fantasy, horror, sci-fi, that type of stuff. So,
We moderate it really well too, in the sense
yes,
that
yeah, it's
so
very
many
well
so
moderated.
many so many groups are just
Ah,
um
it's
like
ridiculous.
people that have they're hiding under fake profiles saying they'll market your book or
Oh,
whatever,
yeah.
or self promo spam, like where you'll have a group of 300,000 people, but it's all self promo and not a
It's all
single post
spam
gets one
stuff, I know.
engagement.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
have a team that will literally vet out everything that even looks like it could be spam.
Yep, yep.
Um,
Hmm.
we do allow self promo once a week on a Friday thread
Yep.
that goes out every morning at the same time, so that people can, self do their. But anything else, it's like if you see promo, it's a coordinated. It's
Yeah,
something I've
everything's
coordinated.
coordinated on there. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool. It's pretty awesome. So, how could somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to? Would it be best maybe just to go through this fantasy sci-fi group and message you? How could somebody get a hold of you if they wanted
The
to
best thing
sign on
I
for some
tell everybody this.
consultation?
Sure. I tell everybody this. The best way to find me is on Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
So Michael Evan on Facebook Messenger. Um, I can also be emailed at
Okay.
authorsinfocus at gmail.com.
Authors in
Um,
focus at gmail.com.
yeah.
Okay.
Or just Michael Evan
So if
Facebook
somebody just
Messenger.
wants some advice from you, because you've done quite a few things. So if somebody just wants some advice and some help and they want to sign on with you, they could go to authors in focus at Gmail, or
Yeah,
you
at which
can
point I'll probably say, hey, you know what? Just shoot me a message on Facebook
it's
Messenger.
Facebook
But
Messenger,
if
I
they
find personally is the easiest way. I think
but
that's
if
just
they
so easy
can't
to keep
find me,
track.
if they can't find me, or they're like, oh, there's like six Michael Evans, I don't know, and they don't,
Yeah.
then they can email me there. It's a little easier, and then I'll just be like, here's my Facebook Messenger
Yeah.
profile. Just shoot me this. I'm really informal. Like I enjoy helping people and talking to people about their work and stuff like that. Um, obviously there's, if it gets into programs and bigger things, then it becomes a service. But if
Oh
somebody
yeah,
just wants
sure.
to ask me, somebody wants to just ask me a question or whatever, then happily I'll always help.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun stuff. Well, I'll tell you what, you have a lot going on. You've done a lot with all of your books. I'm so glad that you were with
And my
us
kids
today.
aren't even and my kids aren't even home this morning.
Oh
Now
yeah?
I gotta
They're not-
it's yeah. Like yeah, it's that's why it's quiet in my house right now.
That's
That's
it.
why
Oh,
it worked out, because when I planned this, I had no idea that today was a holiday in Canada with a
yeah, and
family day
it's a holiday in the United
weekend.
States too. It's President's Day here, so everybody's off
Oh,
work,
that's
you know.
right.
And it's
That's
really that's
right.
just means 3 day weekend.
Okay.
That's all. So
Yeah.
it means we don't
So
get
I'm
our
right.
mail and the banks are closed. That's basically it.
Yeah.
It's nothing fancy,
So
but
my kids we're going to pick them up now, but they've been with family friends all weekend. So my wife and I could have like our first like weekend alone in 7 months.
uh
So it's quiet. Otherwise it wouldn't be so quiet.
yeah. Well, I am so glad that you joined us today. I'm glad that you got to talk about all of the books that you've written and all the stuff that you have going on. I want to encourage our audience. Don't forget to go on over to Amazon if you're looking for a really good series. and check out Cider and Ale. I mean, it's a good one. So make sure that you get on there if you want to find that out. Certainly
Especially,
plenty of other books that you can look at. And then don't forget too to go over to the Fantasy Sci-Fi Focus Group on Facebook and join. I mean, even if you're not an author or you're not even sure if it's for you, just go ahead and join and check out what's going on there, because there's some really great stuff happening. I mean, there's a whole community of people that are just they're working together too, and I think that's what's been really fun about that group in
great
particular.
networking. It's like
Yeah, wonderful
I've
networking.
got I've gotten to know a lot of amazing people that
I have too.
I like as human beings. Like, forget about it. Even if I didn't like their
No
work, I would
kidding.
still think they were awesome people.
No
So
kidding. Yeah, just the opportunity to get to meet people, and they're pretty cool people. So I know you've sent quite a few authors my way that we've had on this show, particularly from that fantasy sci-fi group. So
no,
yeah, we're all
I
just kind
love
of
the
coming
podcast.
together.
I like the natural way that
All right. Well, it looks like we've lost Michael, but that's okay. Hey, listen, you've been watching a book, and don't forget to go check out Michael's group. Don't forget to go to his website. We'll have all of that stuff in the description, a link below for you. It's been wonderful as always. Have a fantastic day, and God bless you.